Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is Professor Alan Mendenhall, and we're going to be talking about ESG. Hello, Professor Mendenhall. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I am good. I've known you for quite some time. You are a professor and a literary expert, and I've been reading your works for quite some time now.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my PhD is in English, but I'm a lawyer by training, and my academic work has shifted over about the past 5 or 6 years to corporate America, securities, capital markets, and now I'm working for the Heritage Foundation as a senior analyst in the Capital Markets Initiative.
Great. And what's that about?
Well, we're focusing on, for lack of a better term, wokeness in corporate America, but also analyzing things like ESG and their role in both capital markets and the boardroom and the workplace.
Wokeness. I don't know about you, but I think that wokeism is a boring topic.
Well, it can be, but what the issue is, so I'll back up. Wokeness historically was a term that referred to sort of an awareness of historical racial injustices, but it became a term appropriated by young, primarily left wing white people who did not have a history of oppression as a signal to be cool or to be popular. And so the term was basically taken from people who are using it as an internal code word, as a form of slang, and was, as I said, appropriated by young affluent whites who essentially evacuated it of its original meaning. The right picked up on this and then appropriated the term as something derogatory. And that way, the right used the term woke so that now it sort of is just a pejorative. But the phenomenon that that signifier describes can be pretty interesting if you look at, you know, how it develops, how it spreads. A lot of it does spread through corporate America.
Right. So I read your paper on wokeness. Your co-author is somebody named Daniel Suter. Yes, Daniel Suter, and the paper is entitled ESG Investing, Government Push or Market Pull. And
Yeah,
what are your findings?
yeah, that's a paper where we were refuting a professor from Yale Law School named Jonathan Macy, who argued that ESG is a libertarian phenomenon. And his stated reason for that claim is that, in his view, ESG represents a private effort to push environmental, social, and government initiatives that government itself has failed to push. And we show in that piece that, in fact, ESG is not a privately impelled phenomenon, but rather that governments are the entities driving ESG. And we trace it back to, first, there's the corporate social responsibility movement, but out of that sprang this acronym ESG, which was first articulated at a 2004 United Nations conference called Who Cares Wins. Well, the United Nations is funded by roughly 75% government money. 75% of the money comes from member states. But this particular conference was also hosted by the government of Switzerland. So this was a government funded conference that invited private asset management firms, financial institutions, institutional investors, banks to figure out how to operationalize ESG. And when I should probably back up and say what ESG means. I think as the acronym, most people realize it stands for environmental, social, and governance. But the E refers to things like becoming carbon neutral or even carbon negative by 2030 or by 2050, biodiversity, water, all those kinds of things. The social can be things like DEI in the workplace, or whether a company supports LGBTQ plus causes. And the governance refers to a number of things. You could say, oh, it refers to diversity in the board, or pretty harmless ethical things like transparency. But what I like to say is that the G refers most of all to the shift from the shareholder model of corporate governance to the stakeholder model of corporate governance. So that's a shift from owners controlling the company to an amorphous category called stakeholders, whereby the environment itself could be considered a stakeholder, or any vagary like that. We could say, well, general society writ large is a stakeholder. I mean, historically, most stakeholders were your suppliers, your customers, your consumers, and of course, those stakeholders every corporation has to account for. If you don't have consumers, you're not going to make profits. If you don't please your employees, if you don't treat them well, you're going to have a badly run company. So, of course, it makes sense for companies to treat those stakeholders well. The issue becomes when stakeholder is defined so vaguely and ambiguously under ESG criteria that it could refer to essentially anything. And what happens when a firm adopts those types of nomenclature for their goals, for their reports, for their missions, is that corporations create sort of false categories to direct their behavior. So you could say that under the stakeholder model, our goal is not to maximize profits for shareholders, but to help the environment in this way, or to promote diversity in this community, or any type of sort of abstract good. And once you define that, you get rid of concrete measurables. You get rid of opportunities to assess how you're doing. So it might look good for a CEO who says, oh, well, our profits were down this year. But guess what? Because we don't exist to maximize profits for shareholders, but to meet these benchmarks related to the environment or whatever social category, and we met those, we checked those boxes, so we're actually succeeding as a corporation. And that's actually no way to do business. That's a good
Not
way.
at all. Whenever I am reading a business report and the company refers to ESG, I decide that it's best to disassociate myself from that company. So when I was in Jamaica, I bought shares in this company. I haven't bought shares in that particular company in a while because I'm not in Jamaica. I can buy them, but I opt not to. But that company referenced ESG in a report, and I just ended the reading of that report.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of people have done that and will do that. I do think corporate America is picking up on that, especially after the election of Donald Trump and the pushback against ESG. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, said in 2023 that he was going to drop the term ESG altogether. There's a big regional bank in Alabama called Regions Bank. It's headquartered in Birmingham. And as of right now, BlackRock is its second largest shareholder. And as BlackRock kind of moved away from this terminology of ESG, Regions Bank in its reporting has moved away from the term ESG, but it still exists in the reporting. If you go dig into the reporting, you can see references to different forms of environmental causes, different forms of diversity, but the terminology has just shifted. Did I lose you there for a minute, Lipton? Could you still
Or
hear me?
I can hear you well, but you had an issue. You were frozen for a minute.
Okay, yeah, I was just saying it makes it difficult when the terms begin to shift, but the phenomenon to which the terms refer is still there.
Earlier in the discussion, you referred to quotas as not being dangerous. And that was a direct reference to maybe diversity quotas, gender diversity quotas.
Um, I don't I don't recall saying that exactly. I do think that those types of quotas are harmful and potentially illegal under after the UNC admissions case and looking at how universities cannot consider racial quotas, you are exposing your firm to risk if you are instituting those internally, even if you are a private company. So it's bad from a risk standpoint, but I also think it's bad even from a philosophical standpoint.
It is.
If you go back to Aristotle, Aristotle suggested that we evaluate people based on their actions because those are external manifestations of their intent. And if people are acting in good ways and delivering quality results, then we should reward that behavior because it's a reflection of what people are thinking. But if you look at purely surface level characteristics, like somebody's skin color, that is not something that anybody chose. That is an immutable characteristic that cannot be changed. We are born into the world looking one way. And so if you are evaluating people based on what they look like, then you are not making a moral judgment. You are not assessing them for the value they are adding to society, for their activities, for their intents. You are evaluating them purely on the basis of something that is unchosen. And that is, under that Aristotelian paradigm, fundamentally unethical.
Many of these arguments are not propelled by empirical data. Before I have any conversation or write, I like to read the data. I don't read the Wall Street Journal and look at the report saying, oh, according to this study, ESG is bad. I prefer to read the study, including the footnotes. And many of these organizations touting ESG and gender quotas, it is either they are disingenuous or they are liars because the empirical evidence does not support gender quotas. I've read many negative studies.
Yeah, there is a researcher at Florida Atlantic University named Siri Turgeson who has done a lot of work on this subject. She would be the expert who can speak to it better than I could, but she has done the sort of empirical quantitative work on that subject and focused in particular on European companies to show how once you institute, for example, gender quotas, she shows that rather than picking the most qualified women to serve on the board, you end up getting companies picking like politicians' wives and things like that. And so what happens is these women get on the boards and they make a lot of bad decisions that harm the companies. And long term, that actually sets women back because it suggests that women actually aren't doing a good job on these boards in their bird service, but it's only because the wrong women are being chosen just because these quotas are being instituted. It's making companies choose people for political reasons, but not based on experience or intellectual capacity or other forms of merit.
And the argument does not control for preferences and personality differences. I've interviewed scholars and I've read recent studies, and many studies show that personality differences explain the paucity of women in STEM and the lack of representation of women on boards.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me.
And one study said that female managers had a masculine personality. This was done by Luigi Gusso.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's not a literature in which I've done a deep dive, but that's interesting to hear.
No, that's the issue. People like to talk about female equality and gender empowerment, but most people are unwilling to do a deep dive. They prefer to talk and then feed us with bad policy.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And even the Macy article that I began with, it was predicated on a number of assumptions. If he had done any digging whatsoever, he would have seen how ESG is impelled by government forces. And it doesn't really take a lot of thinking to figure this out. So if you look at Forbes' annual list of billionaires, the United States has around 900. And they've got a combined net worth of about 6.8 trillion. If you look at the entire globe, there are a little over 3,000 billionaires. That includes the 902 or whatever it is from the United States, but there are a little over 3,000. I think the number is like 3,028, and they have a total wealth of about $16 trillion. Well, guess how many assets under management globally? That's
Repeat,
way, way
Alan,
higher.
Alan, you
Yeah.
were frozen for a while. So you said that America's 900 billionaires, and then you said assets under management. So continue from there. Assets under management.
Okay. So there are 902 billionaires in the U.S., and they have about 6.8 trillion assets under management. Globally, there are a little over 3,000. I think it's 3,028 billionaires. And this is all according to Forbes. And their collective net worth is about $16.1 trillion. Well, we have over $100 trillion of assets under management globally. That number dwarfs that $16 trillion figure. So, where does all this money come from? Well, it comes from government. It comes from the big source of it is pension money. In the United States, you have state pension funds. You got 50 state pension funds, but then you also have federal pension funds. And then virtually every sovereign nation has a pension fund. And that's not even talking about sovereign wealth funds or government bonds, whether you're talking about municipal bonds or other forms of bonds. So to get to over $100 trillion of assets under management, you're dealing with a lot of taxpayer money or money contributed by public employees to their retirement fund. But at any rate, that salary gets paid by taxpayer money. So yeah, indirectly, you're talking about government money. So to get to over $100 trillion of assets under management, you have to have government money. The big three, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, together manage about $30 trillion of assets under management. That's roughly the equivalent to the entire GDP of the United States of America. It's more than the GDP of all of China. So it is unrealistic to even make the claim that ESG is just some purely private phenomenon. It's just not even the math's not even there.
ESG is politics. That's why I was skeptical of its effectiveness.
Yeah,
Most people who are shareholders buy businesses because they want money. That's their motivation. Women investors are a bit different. Some of them like to call themselves impact investors.
right.
Personally, I am a money investor. I buy into a company because I want to earn. When it comes to investing and finance, I am not overly philosophical. So
Yeah,
ESG was basically blackmail. People felt that if they did not support ESG, that was an indication that they did not care about the environment.
that's right. And a lot of companies were greenwashing too. There were companies purporting to support all these environmentally friendly causes. You could go buy uh, exchange traded funds, ETFs, that were allegedly ESG weighted portfolios. But if you went digging in there, you realized, oh, this ETF has just all the same securities pooled into it that any other ETF has. There's not really any difference. So this is a form of greenwashing. The SEC instituted the names rule to try to crack down on that. But it was a real problem and remains a real problem. Another thing with ESG that people, when you say it's politics, if you look at the presidency of Joe Biden, he instituted some executive orders that essentially embedded ESG within the administrative state. And he issued one executive order that, in essence, required ESG to be integrated throughout the Financial Stability Oversight Council. Well, what falls into the Financial Stability Oversight Council? You've got the Federal Reserve Board, you've got the Department of the Treasury, you've got the SEC, and you've got the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Why would Biden target the Financial Stability Oversight Council? Well, because it essentially oversees the flow of capital in the United States. Those are all the money centers of government. So if Biden can capture that, then everything that flows downstream from that will be affected by ESG. We'll have to move in the ESG direction. Now, that particular rule, President Trump immediately rescinded, and his administration decided not to defend the SEC climate disclosure rule, which I guess is technically still on the books, but because it's not being defended in court, it will probably just go away.
Exactly. It's like on page 22, well, not 22.2, page 87. On page 87, you write, the Biden administration has a stated goal that 50% of new car sales must be electric vehicles by 2030.
Yeah. And the Biden administration also had some language. I forget whether this is in the executive order directly, but it was on the Biden administration website where they talk about, and I'm paraphrasing here, they talk about using the federal government to push these climate related things, to push private industry in the direction they want it to go. So they were very open about using government muscle to try to shove companies into areas that companies would not otherwise have gone in. The companies did not want to go in these directions because they were unprofitable, but the government forced them to go in those directions. In particular, the federal government and the Biden administration. And I think that's still happening. I mean, I think we still have regulations, in particular in financial services. Banks are always having to do these disclosure things that they wouldn't otherwise do if it weren't for the regulatory burdens they're under. This debanking phenomenon that we're dealing with right now, where banks are terminating the services of firearms dealers or manufacturers, of conservatives, that's happening because of regulatory burden that goes back to the Obama administration that involves this phrase reputational risk. And that term was weaponized by the Obama administration to say, oh, if you are doing business with these conservative organizations, you're undergoing a reputational risk. And so debanking started as that. Operation Choke Point was a perfect example of the Obama administration doing that. But banks have been debanking now for over a decade, and that needs to stop.
My objection is that many developing countries are laboring under these delusions. So, countries like America and European countries, they set the standard. Developing countries are following. And so, I'm from Jamaica, and in Jamaica, there's this publication called The Gleaner. It used to be prestigious, but now it's garbage, and it tends to toe these stupid, idiotic left-leaning lines.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is that left-leaning scholars in, for example, post-colonial studies or something like that might have a field day looking at ESG if they took the time to examine it and learn what it was. They might say, oh, this sort of looks like neo-colonialism or whatever term they might use. But the impacts of ESG disproportionately fall upon developing nations that can't afford to just do EVs. You know, not everybody can drive
No,
an
no,
EV.
well, Alan, I'm going to disagree with you a bit.
Okay.
And you don't have to respond. It's not politically feasible for
Sure.
you to respond. But I live in a developing country, and personally, I am not impressed by the anti-colonial rhetoric that permeates the environment in many developing countries, because leaders and intellectuals in developing countries, they kowtow to intellectuals and politicians in developed countries, either knowingly or without knowing that they're doing it. But
I,
many of the ideas that they expose are stupid ideas
I
that
agree.
are generated in the labs of the developed world, and they are unsuited for
I
a developing context.
I agree with you. My point is only that if those left-wing intellectuals actually looked at ESG, because they don't know what it is, they're talking about grievance culture and
Yes,
race
that's all.
politics and new forms of Marxism and all that. But if they actually looked at ESG, they would find that it is not what it is not friendly to their views, but they don't take a look at it. And so they're actually unwittingly complicit in their own subjection if you're trying to look at things through their eyes. Now, I agree with you. I believe a lot of this post-colonialism is ridiculous and bad and destructive, and that it reprocesses outworn types of Marxism and foments racial and class unrest and does all kinds of bad stuff. I agree with you. My point is just that it's funny to me that the left adopts these ESG frameworks uncritically when they undermine every argument that they seek to present about empowering developing countries or marginalized communities or whatever slogan phrase you want to use.
It's like renewable energies. Renewable energies are suitable for some facilities, like probably a school or a house, but industrially, they're not suited for long term energy production. They're also polluting the environment because renewables are energy intensive and mineral intensive. And this is the big whammy. Renewables benefit middle class and upper class people. They are benefiting from the subsidies.
Right. Subsidies and the write-offs and everything else. That's exactly right.
If you're a left leaning person, you should not be supporting renewables.
Yeah, there are a lot of billionaires making a lot of money off of left-wing propagandists not knowing what they're talking about.
Exactly. Though I know people who think that renewables are garbage, but they are packaging financial programs to help renewable energy investors access funding because they want money, but they believe that renewables are garbage.
Yeah, I think it presents a nice public choice problem. I think public choice economics explains a lot of the incentive structures behind why people do certain things with allegedly environmentally friendly products, goods, whether we're talking about renewables or any other type of energy and power.
Alan, how popular is recycling in America? Because I'm in Europe and I know that recycling in Europe is just crazy.
I don't know how to measure that. It was something that when I was growing up, people used to talk about all the time. So in the 1980s and 90s, in public school classrooms, everyone talked about reduce, reuse,
Yeah,
recycle.
recycle.
Yeah, reduce, reuse, recycle. I don't hear slogans like that anymore. There are like recycling still a thing, but I don't hear people just talking about it all the time. Maybe it's because I just don't pay attention to that. But
It's, be- it's
it's kind
because
of
you don't live in
everything
Europe.
ends up in the same place anyway. It's all going to the same place anyway.
No, it's because you don't live in Europe.
That could be. That
No,
very well could
seriously.
be.
So in the UK, when you're disposing of your garbage, you put paper in one bag, plastic in one bag, cardboard looking stuff in another bag, and in some countries there are like 7 different bags.
Yeah, I remember I lived in Japan for a year and a half. And when I got there, I didn't know this about the garbage, but it was as you say, you had to have a different bag for each type of product. And I had no idea. So I just put everything in the same garbage bag the way I would here and put my garbage out. And I found out about a month later that some of my Japanese neighbors, the Japanese are very meticulous about things. They were going through my garbage and resorting my garbage into different bags. And when I found out, I felt terrible that my neighbors were going through all this trouble for me. But then I also thought it was just so ridiculous that we had to do it in the first place.
Exactly. So I'm in here in the UK, and I say, look, this is garbage. If you make an error, the garbage man will pass your house without picking up your garbage. And I don't think that I should be obligated to waste my time on something as pathetic as recycling, because based on what I've read, it doesn't work. It's not efficient. So why am I doing it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's not an issue that I have studied at great length, Lipton. I'll be honest.
Yeah, well, I have seen. I decided to peruse the issue because it was
Sure.
becoming so topical, and I found so many studies, even studies from environmental organizations, showing that it doesn't work. It's a waste of time.
It's very interesting. And I've heard that argument made before.
Yeah, the first time I heard the argument, I was a bit surprised, but then I started to dig deeper into literature. It doesn't work. We can just move on.
Well, I bet this is just a proposition, but I bet as a hypothesis, if you were to go look at the recycling industry, you'd find a lot of subsidies, a lot of government grants, a lot of government money being channeled through to those companies. And there is a embedded stake in ensuring that industry gets perpetuated. And so, it doesn't take long to do these kind of public choice analyses and figure out why bad incentives lead to bad practices.
The Center for Climate Integrity makes a similar point. Corporations like it.
Yeah, corporations like it. I mean, and that's what's so funny is a lot of kind of leftists think that they think of, oh, big bad corporations are for the free market and they want to promote free markets. Well, actually, the bigger the corporation, the less likely it is to want to support a free market because it wants to institute as many anti-competitive measures as possible to prevent new entrants into the marketplace. It doesn't want to have to compete. It wants built-in systemic advantages. That's why they have
Exactly.
armies of lobbyists.
Crony capitalism.
That's
When
exactly
companies
right.
become big and powerful, they don't want any competition.
That's exactly right. It's sort of basic stuff to people who study economics, but
Quite basic. You don't need to study economics. Just read a newspaper or some book.
yeah, that's true too.
Just Google. There is the journal Public Choice.
That's right.
There
I'm
is the
publishing it.
online version of Public Choice. Econ Log as a Public Choice blog.
Yep.
Just read the blog. You don't need to be a quantitative economist.
That's exactly right. You don't need to be quantitative to do public choice either, even if you are an economist.
But for people who are invested in poor people and socioeconomic issues, left-leaning people really need to do more reading.
I think that's right. I think it's a problem on the right as well. I think we have elements of the right that haven't studied enough economics too. But I agree with you wholeheartedly on the left. In fact, when I was an undergraduate student, I thought I was on the left, but it was mainly because I opposed the Iraq War. That was when I was in college, by the way. My first day of college was 9/11. That was my first class and I opposed the Iraq war. So I thought I was on the left and I had bad economic views. So I was, in fact, on the left economically. But then I graduated and while living in Japan, discovered the Austrian School of Economics through the Mises Institute, started reading Mises and Hayek and Rothbard.
Exactly. The betrayal of the American right.
Yeah. And I realized, oh my goodness, not only was I wrong about economics, but I was actually right on foreign policy. And all these people that are on the right actually held my foreign policy views. But foreign policy for me was the highest issue at that time. And it was the most important thing. And then when I found out that there was this rich, robust tradition on the right that agreed with sort of my then I call it non-interventionist stance for lack of a better term, I was excited and I immediately jumped into the economics part and found myself drawn to the Austrian school. And, the rest was history.
I was at an event in America recently, and at that event, a former high level official said that military intelligence did not support the Iraq War.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we've also learned that some of the alleged justifications for the war were based on false information, or maybe not false, but incorrect information. False implies maybe wrongdoing. And I can't say, I don't have the knowledge to know whether data was manipulated or whether there just wasn't enough information. But I think it's fair to say incomplete or erroneous information led to the alleged justifications for that conflict.
And back to your point about foreign policy and non interference, Donald Trump was bashed for revoking America's participation in the Paris Treaty, but he
Mhm.
was right.
Yes, he was right to be.
11 or 8 cents of every dollar is not profitable.
No, that's correct. And, the Paris Agreement ties you to all kinds of obligations that threaten the sovereignty of your nation. And that to me is a real problem. I look at, so there's something called the European Union's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It's a mouthful, but it is ESG related and it requires large European companies and non EU companies. If they have significant EU operations, there are all these criteria that classify a company for whether it qualifies or not. But these companies all have to report a ton of stuff, but one key thing is called double materiality, where you have to report how your social and environmental commitments impact your financial material of your company materiality and your impact materiality, how they um, show your company is having an impact on the environment or culture. Well, it's going to cost billions of dollars for companies to comply with these regulations. And I'm looking at all these world leaders who have been coming in particular, they were European leaders just this week who came in to meet with President Trump to talk about the Russia Ukraine deal. And I'm thinking, gosh, Trump is fixated on tariffs and he's looking at these European leaders saying Europe needs to invest more money in its own defense and all these kinds of things. But I have not yet heard him or his administration mention the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which in some ways is almost like the EU imposing sanctions on the United States and all the United States companies. And somebody has to point this out to the administration and say, wait a second, because the United States is big enough and the private sector in the United States is big enough to have a real effect on that corporate sustainability reporting directive of the EU and to really push back against that, because that's going to be a dangerous, costly thing for businesses everywhere. And it's going to
Again,
hurt Europe. It's silly for Europe. It's like Europe shooting itself in the foot.
just like the UK. Yeah, the UK is an expert in the art of self-destruction. And for obvious reasons. What are the British known for even today? They are known for being the leaders in institutional development. But when you are too institutionalized, you become susceptible to bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So the Brits, they were the first country to create the regulatory sandbox. They want to launch a stock exchange for private companies, and they're also the leader in net zero regulation
Well, and
because
it's
they're too institutionalized.
and that managerial bureaucratization has social effects, cultural effects too. It's not just economic. For example, in England, people are getting arrested for praying on sidewalks. That is thought crime. I mean, that's straight out of George Orwell, and it's happening. And that's a frightening thing to me.
Yeah, in the English, they're locking up people for speech online,
Yep.
and it's a double standard justice system. So the counselor, he said something about killing perceived Nazis. The matter was adjudicated in a court of law. He has been freed. Lucy Connolly is a random working class woman. She's uninfluential. Her views do not influence society. Lucy Connolly, because of her socioeconomic status, had to comply with the justice system. There was never a trial and she went to prison. Some people are saying the former case was adjudicated. Lucy's case was not adjudicated in a court of law because she complied with the court system. She basically said, yes, I'm guilty, but she's a working class woman. She didn't have the political capital to defend herself.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that case, but I am not at all surprised to hear about it.
Yeah, yeah. In England is a weird. I like England. I really do. Like I
I
think
love it. I love the historical England, the Magna Carta, the common law, the tradition that runs from Magna Carta to Bill of Rights, Petition of Rights, that the ancient rights and liberties enjoyed under the common law. So that's wonderful. I like that. I tend to be very Burkean or Oakshottian in my disposition, but England in particular, under its current government, is becoming somewhat frightening.
I like England. It's walkable. I really admire the British, but they're literally killing themselves for no reason, like most Europeans.
Yes, I agree with that.
Like it's really sad what has happened to Europe. Like it's really sad. I like I'm in the UK, and it's a place where you can work and return home. I really like that about the UK. I feel like if I were in America, every day I would be somewhere doing something really busy.
Well, that's right. Today's Wednesday, so tonight I'll be going to burger night at the clubhouse, which is half
Exactly.
price hamburgers. So yeah.
Exactly. In America, there's always some event, something to do. In the UK, you can go to work, go home, and just watch TV. Yeah, and there's some problems like in places like Birmingham, but I don't go to Birmingham. Have you ever been to Birmingham, UK?
I have not been to Birmingham, but I studied at the Shakespeare Institute of the University of Birmingham, but that's located in Stratford upon Avon. It's not actually located in Birmingham proper. It's Shakespeare's birthplace.
What did Shakespeare teach you about liberty? Because I know you have written on libertarianism and Shakespeare. Do you have an article on the Merchant of Venice?
I do.
Yes, I
Yeah,
remember it. Yes,
that's an older article, and of
yes.
course I haven't looked at it in many years, but there were lessons there about, in particular, the importance of trade and the setting of Venice as a commercial um, center was important to the play, and explains a lot of other things that go on in the play.
Yes, you're like Joan Cavallo.
Yeah, she just did a book on I guess film literature and media and libertarianism that she dedicated to Paul Cantor. Of course,
Yes,
Paul
Paul
Cantor passed
Campbell
away a
died.
few years ago, and then Stephen Cox, his collaborator on literature and the economics of liberty, passed away last year. So it's a very
I
sad
didn't
thing.
know Stephen Cox there. Let me look it up. Let me look it up.
Yeah,
I
he
didn't
passed
know.
away last year. So those were two guys who were mentors to me when I was in graduate school. So it was very sad to hear that they are now both gone. And Stephen Cox, of course, edited Liberty Magazine.
Yes, I used to read Liberty Magazine.
I
Yes.
remember the print form. I loved it. It was very, I guess, I don't know, very plain looking, but carried a lot of punch and had great rhetoric and great writers.
Did you
Unadorned.
did you read the Libertarian Alliance?
Yeah, the in England.
Yes.
Yeah, I used to read a lot of stuff coming out of there, but it's been a long time. I would say it's been at least a decade. Maybe
Because
it's been more than a decade, in
they
fact.
no longer publish.
No, they
They,
don't. I wasn't sure about that. I did not
they
know.
no longer publish the Libertarian Alliance. They no longer publish. But you can read the archives.
Yeah. I was not aware of that. I haven't heard about the Libertarian Alliance in a long time.
I just find it, well, I don't find it strange. I know why. But the libertarian movement is not taking over society. There was
No.
the Ron Paul movement for a while and the Ron Paul movement, but libertarianism is not a thriving movement in America. Why?
Well, I think that the growth of the federal government, if you look at a timeline of the 20th century and you just map onto it the growth of the federal government, it's so large in scope and scale that it's very difficult to undo it. Like, what do you say, when the genie comes out of the bottle, it's hard to put the genie back into the bottle? I think that's part of the reason. Even though Ron Paul's ideas were very influential, and even though the Republican Party has moved toward Ron Paul on foreign policy, among other things, you even have some people who are not libertarian calling for auditing the Fed. But these institutions are just so massive and managerial and bureaucratic. We talk about the deep state just sort of as a casual term for it, but we've got career federal employees that have done nothing else but just be bureaucrats. It's just hard. You get inertia, and it's hard to undo things that have been in place for so long and that have grown and rigidified and ossified and crystallized. It's hard to get rid of them. It's a lot easier to start a program than it is to end a program.
It is. It's natural for government to grow.
It is. That's the thing. That's the danger is once you start that growth, it's really hard. It's the slippery slope.
Some institutions are now cherished by Americans. Their status is sacrosanct, like the Department of Education.
Yeah, but we're seeing the Department of Education be slowly dismantled right now.
It should be.
It should be. It
There
shouldn't
is no
exist.
there is no argument for a Department of Education. America is a big country with many research organizations studying educational policy. We don't need a DOE. Look at the grades. In America, there are districts where all students are failures. All.
Historically, both family law and education law were more decentralized. Of course, the Department of Education just came in under Jimmy Carter. It actually hasn't been around that
Exactly.
long. So to argue that it should be completely disassembled is not that radical of a concept. We're just saying, let's undo this thing that hasn't been around very long to begin with. And by the way, it's been part of the Republican Party's platform, or at least it's been spoken about by prominent Republicans since the Reagan administration. So why people would consider this to be controversial now, I don't know. It seems to me to be pretty mainstream stuff.
These issues concern me because America and the UK. I have a friend. We were having a conversation some time ago, and she said, "Look, I care about three countries. One, Jamaica, because I'm from Jamaica, and I care about the UK and America. Everywhere else is really a waste of time." And I agree with her.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Everywhere is really, the world is really just America and the UK. So if those countries fail, we all fail.
Well, I think the Western world. I mean, I'd say that. It's hard for me to discount. Germany and France and their economies are just so big. And then obviously, when you start taking account the East and Russia and China, that's a whole different.
Yes, but people only know. Look, Canada, even before the Trudeau years, Canada was seen as an efficient society. It was prosperous, but not overly innovative or ambitious. The world is really the UK and America.
Yeah, Canada is not an enormous player on the world stage.
Yes. If you want to make a difference, you go to the UK or to America.
I think that's a big point. I mean, I think that those, the UK and America have a greater degree of not just economic, but cultural influence on other Western nations. I do think that's a true statement. And not just when I say West, I'm not just talking about European, but also like South American and Central American. I'm saying Western Hemisphere.
If those countries fail, we're doomed. And that's why the presidency of Donald Trump is so important. Because Donald Trump is an innovator and a reformer. He's an institutional innovator. He's overturning policies that should never have been implemented in the first place.
I think
like disparate impact theory that's been overturned or was overturned.
Yeah, and the disparate impact. Well, you've also got all kinds of stuff that the Department of Justice is doing with the universities, making sure that the universities are not discriminating on the basis of race, and that universities are not mismanaging their funds, and that universities are not just basically giant armies for left-wing causes. And I'm really enjoying watching different Ivy League universities genuflect to the administration. It's been astounding to see.
And the world should follow Trump's lead on AI, not Europe. So I'm from Jamaica, so I will read local newspaper, and these silly people think that we should take our cue from Europe. Hell no.
That's funny. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, AI it's interesting because I liken AI to the creation of the printing press. And, there was a lot of turmoil in Europe after the creation of the printing press and, the Gutenberg Bible. And all of a sudden, people can translate the Bible into their native tongue. And we have religious wars and chaos. And there's disruption, mass disruption. Well, nobody anymore is too worried about the fact that we can all print books in our own language. AI, there's a lot of anxiety about AI, but we'll eventually get through it. It will eventually get to where it's a normal part of human activity and interaction.
People should just learn how to use it properly. So, for example, I don't use AI for research. AI is primarily an editing tool. That's how I use it as a writer. It's impressive. I've used all of them and they're okay, but I think Chat GPT is the best so far. But AI cannot write a piece that's truly insightful. So
Yeah.
let's say for example, we were to write an AI essay on ESG. It would be generic, flat, and uncontroversial.
And it would also be unoriginal because
Yes.
all it's going to do is pull in existing stuff,
Oh,
and
stop right there. AI, because I do this is something I do for fun all the time. AI doesn't really cite studies. AI
oh,
will not, if you say to ChatGPT, write an essay critiquing ESG, ChatGPT will not cite your study.
well, it's interesting because I have heard of cases. There was one recently in Alabama, in fact, where lawyers were producing briefs and that using AI. And I don't know which program they used, whether it was ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it was, but the platform generated phantom citations,
It does that all the
cases
time. Fake
that did
studies.
not exist.
It
And
does
so
it
when
all
the
the
judges
time.
went to look up the cases, they're like, these cases don't actually exist.
Yeah, AI does it all the time. AI will give you a study with the right author, but wrong title, wrong journal.
Now, I used AI last night to get recommendations for a TV show. I don't watch TV anymore, but there was a phase during COVID where I like to watch Netflix, and I watched The Borgias and The Crown and Game of Thrones and The Last Kingdom and Marco Polo and Versailles and movies like that, or I guess shows like that. And I thought, well, I don't know what shows exist like that. So I went to ChatGPT and said, hey, I used to watch all these shows. Can you recommend some shows that I might like? And it generated these shows. And it's like, oh, the Medicis. I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a show. That sounds like exactly the type of thing I would like. So it's great for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so when I told ChatGPT to write the ESG essay,
Yeah.
it just gave me some structured arguments based on what it generated from the internet, but it did not cite any study whatsoever because it doesn't have that level of intelligence yet.
It's interesting.
Like the
Eventually, it probably will. But
Pilgram at AEI, he has a study. There's a study by somebody from the Independent Institute. There's your study. There's studies from the Fraser Institute. There are studies which have been reported in Wall Street Journal and other places, but AI cannot write like that yet.
yeah, even if you were to go into AI and say, like, I don't know, write like uh, Robert Frost, that's not a good example. Write like Tom Wolfe or something. It's going to generate a product that is not Tom Wolfe.
Yes. Personally, I think professors should teach students how to use AI instead of complaining that they're cheating with AI.
Yeah, I mean the students are going to do it no matter what. The students are going to be using AI. So
You just teach them how to
gotta,
use it. And
yeah,
like AI is my assistant, so I have a brain, but AI has an effective writing style. I like the prose. It's a bit generic, but I like that type of prose because even when I am not using AI, my writing is accessible but formal.
well, listen, do you know the Lois Lowry book, The Giver, with the old guy that retains all the knowledge? I'm starting to feel like I'm not old. I'm 42, but I'm old enough to start feeling like I might become the giver one day, like the person that doesn't have to rely, that just remembers what things were like beforehand. And because I get all these young people all the time asking me about the history of the conservative movement, the history of libertarianism, like who are these people? And they just don't know it. They can go chat GPT and ask the questions, but like they don't have all the knowledge. The older I get, the more I feel like I'm the giver. I'm the guy that has to pass the knowledge. This is what the color red was, like that's what it feels
No,
like.
I think that the engineers should do a better job at training AI. They're only able to feed AI with popular knowledge. So they cannot, because of how AI is being trained, AI will not cite a book by somebody like Frank Chodorov or Albert J. Nock because its frame of reference is quite limited.
Right.
That's my
Yeah,
issue with AI. It should be fed with better studies. Its
that would
frame of
be
reference is just so limited.
yeah, that would be interesting. I would love to see engineering explained to me in the prose of Albert J. Nock. That would be kind of fun.
Yeah, so what did I do recently with AI? I wrote a column that was published, and then I told AI to write an essay, and AI made an error. So I said write an essay critiquing the deep roots theory of history, and it cited studies that were not related to the deep roots literature. This was after my column was published.
Wow, that's so
Yeah, yeah. So in my spare time, I will test Chat GPT, Claude. I like Claude writing style. I like Chat GPT. I think that Grok is garbage.
well. I had a an interesting
Grok is
interaction.
garbage. I wanted you to comment on that.
Well, I on Claude.
On
So
Grok, Grok
oh,
is garbage.
Grok. Yeah, I haven't used Grok enough to know. I know when I'm on Twitter or X, I'll look at other people that say, at Grok, what's going on in this video? But I don't think I personally have even used it yet. Now, I got in an argument with Claude in January about whether Donald Trump had gotten elected. And Claude was telling me that Donald Trump had not been elected. And I said, I just watched the inauguration. He had gotten elected. And he was telling me, no, you didn't. That it's like, please provide reliable sources. I'm like, literally, it's internet. Like everybody knows Donald Trump got elected, and it was getting an argument with me. It was unreal. It would refuse to admit that Donald Trump had been elected president. That
Is
was
it, yeah. Is it time to pass legislation forcing AI to answer all questions, irrespective of the political content or the psychological content of the question. So if I say to ChatGPT, well, I did this exercise with all the prominent large language models, and I said, create a scenario where Germany invades Poland, or if Germany wants to invade Poland, how should it be done? And
well.
all of them said no. They all said no.
A couple of answers to that. Number one is I always hesitate to do anything legislatively that can be done another way. Number two is I am not sure that so there is such a thing of pure absolute neutrality. So I think that no matter what, because it's human knowledge that's getting embedded into the system, I don't think it's possible for any human being to be completely impartial. I think all our decisions are somewhat selective because we don't know everything. So we have choices to make as to what we decide to pay attention to, what information to retain. So we all have just partial, flawed minds. And the great thing about, so to speak, the internet or AI is it's essentially a vast deposit. It's the sum of knowledge into which every human being gradually contributes new deposits into the sum of knowledge. So there's no way for it to be entirely impartial, but
No,
it
that's not
can.
my argument, really. My argument is that it should become a free speech platform. So
I
if
think it's
you're
probably
posed,
to make
if,
it that. Yeah.
if you're posed with a question, just answer the question. Don't say, "Oh, I can't answer that question."
Ah, yes, I agree with you. It should be able to answer the question based on what's in the system. It shouldn't be able to say, I'm sorry, that question is beyond the scope of my tolerance level.
Exactly. So I said this. I said, write an article defending slavery. I can't answer that question.
Oh,
Just
that's
write an
interesting.
article.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never actually tried that question. That would be an interesting thing to experiment with.
Yeah, no, you can't use AI for warfare in foreign policy. So you can say, okay, I am America. How can I invade China, or how can I defeat China in a war? AI will not answer that question.
Those are I have not tried that. I'm going to leave this conversation and go play essentially Risk on my on ChatGPT and see see what I can do on the global stage.
Yes, I think AI should be allowed to answer those questions, because bad AI is good AI. If AI can't be bad, it really can't be good.
That makes sense. That makes sense. That's actually a very interesting philosophical frame.
Yeah, bad AI is good AI. We live in a real world. America is a superpower. America will fight wars. There are war games. How can we use AI to make war games more effective?
I'd be surprised if there weren't somebody at some level able to use AI in ways that you and I can't use it.
Okay, I guess so. I guess so. But thanks for coming on. It has been a pleasure, and we'll definitely talk more in the future.
Sorry, I think I cut out there. I apologize for my connection. I'm surrounded by thunderstorms that are kind of coming up, so
Okay, okay,
I think that's
okay,
part of the problem.
okay. I just said thanks for coming on. That's all. So I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to close.
Okay.
All right.